And then when I was developing Wayward Strand as well, there was this one particular kids book that I referenced so much, and it's a book called A Puzzling Day at Castle MacPelican.
Hello and welcome to One Cool Thing, a podcast from indie game studio Digue Fabrique, hosted by me, Hannah Nicklin. One Cool Thing is a podcast speaking with people in and around video games about one cool thing not from games really fascinating them right now. I'll introduce them and their practice, talk about the one cool thing they've brought to the conversation, and consider how it's shaping how they think about their work. It's a chance to hear more about the practices of cool folks working in games, and hopefully somewhere where we can all reflect on how we think about how we make things. Before we jump into this week's interview, I just want to note a few things. So number one, Digue Fabrique, the company bringing you this podcast, has a brand new game which was recently announced. It's coming out later this year, and you can wishlist us on Steam right now. So you need to put the name Salt Sea Chronicles, as in stories about an archipelago of the name Salt Sea Chronicles, into Google, which will find our website and direct you straight to wherever it is that you would enjoy wishlisting us. Steam is a good place to do that though, because it does mean that other people are more likely to find our game. And again, if you're enjoying these recordings and listening to these little chats, then please do just consider giving us a nice rating. That's good. It's nice. It's a nice thing to do. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce our next guest. Welcome to Goldie Bartlett, an illustrator and artist based out of Melbourne, Australia. She works in paint, pencil, digital media, and video games. Recent games which feature her work include Florence and Movement Study 1, and most recently launched Wayward Strand as part of the core team of Ghost Pattern Games. Wayward Strand is described on their website as a heartfelt interactive story told in a curious way. I really like that last bit. Curious is a great way to describe a game. And in it, you play as a young girl who's visiting a hospital set on an airship. The joy of the game is very much in exploring the histories and stories and mysteries of the hospital's inhabitants. And it has this gorgeous storybook aesthetic, which Goldie has played a big part in. They're also in the art and digital field as well, contributing to graphic novels and the internationally exhibited Now Play This commission, The Grannies, which is a documentary short film about Goldie and their pals, the Grannies, pushing the boundaries of Red Dead Online. She also produced a beautiful hand-drawn map for Untitled Goose Game as well, which I wanted to highlight because that just came into my feeds again super recently, and I was reminded that it's beautiful. Okay, Goldie, how do you feel about that introduction? Are you anything you want to add? Anything you want to amend?
No. I mean, it feels nice to have some of your work summarized in a neat package like that. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think it's a great series and very honored to be a guest.
I'm very excited to have you.
Oh, good.
You're one of the RMIT kids, who have a connection to Digue Fabrique, because Doug Wilson, one of our co-founders, right, is one of the sort of the teachers on the RMIT game design course. Is it called game design? There's actually a few, isn't there? There's like a master's and a degree and stuff.
That's right. So we're in, I think it's a Bachelor of Media and Communication game design. And he and I are currently a mentor pair. So we're mentoring a few of the third year undergraduates who are making their final capstone project, so a bunch of games, and it's been really fun.
Awesome. And RMIT very much a part of seeding the wonderful Melbourne game scene, which is super rich, right? It's full of a wide spectrum of people doing cool tiny things and big huge things, and then also cool tiny things which blow up into huge big things. Goose Game is a really good example. And I know Unpacking is not Melbourne, it's Brisbane, but that Australian game scene, for the number of people in Australia, really kind of hits above its weight. I'm sorry, that's a sport metaphor from a sport I don't understand, and I got lost halfway through it.
I know what you mean. Yeah. It does. And I think it's Melbourne's, sort of for a long time it was at the butt end of the world, so far away, and I think games and the creative output of Australia in general over the last 10 years in particular have really helped to put us on the map a bit. And yeah, it's been interesting, really interesting to be living here and seeing Melbourne International Games Week really turn into a huge thing. We have now a lot of international guests who come down every year and interact with the the scenes in the industry down here, and there's a lot more opportunities and a lot more cross-pollination happening. And RMIT is sort of I think important to that, because it's the kind of degree where you'll definitely be writing a lot of critical essays, as well as learning 3D and programming and so on.
Working out where you fit into the field, as well as developing your expertise in the field.
For sure. Yeah.
I think out of all of my little flurry of Aussie guests so far, Goldie, you're absolutely the one who should be employed by Melbourne Tourist Board, by the way. Or Melbourne Investment Boards or something.
Maybe.
A great picture. Thank you for setting that scene for us. But I'm going to move us on so we can talk more about you via your one cool thing. So tell me what one cool thing you've brought to the podcast today.
Absolutely. So I thought, when I was asked to come on the podcast, I was like, oh man, what's something I can bring on? And I realized there's this sort of style of illustration I've been tampering with over the past couple of years, here and there. And I didn't realize it was a style and that it had a name until not long ago at all, when I found there was a whole subreddit dedicated to this particular type of illustration. It's called wimmelbilder, or Wimmelbilder book, which doesn't stand for it. In German, it's translates to teeming picture book. So most Wimmelbilder or Wimmelbilder illustrations you'll see will be sort of delivered in children's books, or perhaps in sort of illustrative maps. And if you want the kind of simplest, that's what she's talking about, just think of Where's Wally, or Where's Waldo if you're in America. Mm-hmm. Those double spread big illustrations that are just teeming with detail, characters, landscape. And I've really enjoyed sort of drawing that sort of style of work, and thinking about it and meeting other artists who do it, and that's where I'm gonna start the conversation today.
Wonderful. You just made me wonder what issue Americans have with the name Wally. Why they had to Waldo Wally. Maybe there's some kind of ancient insult or something which is connected to that.
Sounds
I suppose we do say in British English, what a Wally, but it's a very gentle insult.
That's right.
In any case, thank you for bringing in Wimmelbilder and Wimmelbilder book, hidden picture books, or as you say, teeming picture books. These really rich spreads where there are just a ton of details, right? And Where's Wally / Waldo is the most recognizable. But I was sort of obviously digging into some research to support asking you questions today. And a lot of people suggest Hieronymus Bosch as one of the progenitors of the teeming picture. If you think of the Garden of Earthly Delights, shout out to the probably now defunct, because Twitter likes to destroy everything that was redemptive about its platform. There was a bot which reposts close-ups of the Garden of Earthly Delights, and even the close-ups are full of details. And it's a really wonderful way to just gently experience the painting every day, is to just see another tiny close-up of it and see how many extra details are in it. But I think most people are familiar with, or could easily Google Garden of Earthly Delights and get an adult X-rated version of this format. I should say there are a lot of I guess penises and sex. Not sure I understand. Do you know what? Siri really wants to jump into my podcast recordings recently. I don't know what's going on.
I'm not sure I understand Hieronymus Bosch either, Siri. I think look, the Garden of Earthly Delights is quite a confronting and horrific painting. It's just layered with symbolism, and it's when was it made? Late 15th century, so pretty early on. And I think Bosch was a pretty weird dude. And
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, and really loved to mess with people and kind of cast a bit of a mirror back onto society at the time, and he used a lot of religious symbolism. The other painter, he was Dutch. The other Dutch painter is Bruegel, who about half a century later started doing the same thing, which were these, less. I mean, they're also kind of confronting paintings sometimes, but big. He did this painting called Children's Games, Kinderspiele, which is, you'll know it if you see it. You will have seen this painting, and it's basically it's not a very big painting. I think it's about 60 inches across, I'd say, and it's but it's stacked full of all sorts of people preparing for a festival, I think, and all of the kids are running around playing all sorts of games. And it's just a beautiful. Overall, you stand back and you look at it, it's a nice painting. But when you really say, okay, I'm going to spend, well, I mean, the Twitter bot would be perfect, but spend time looking and getting those little details out. It's just nuts. Some of the little brush strokes that are, 7 hairs to give a glint of something on a hula hoop that's in the top right-hand corner, then it's sort of a quarter of an inch across. It's all there. So compared to Bosch Bruegel, though, he had kind of more authentic or like naturalistic depictions. I don't think he messed around with like, here's a half woman, half fish creature being.
So, like, depending on your tastes, you can go to one of those
that's
two
right.
examples. Do you like the half woman, half fish? Do you want the kids playing? One of the two. It's also worth saying that, like, just as an aside, I think Boschbot, which is what it's called or was called, is actually just one of the more interesting, like, digital interventions in art that I've seen. I think the White Pube, a duo of critics, in part involved in games but trained in fine art, wrote a really lovely essay on it back in 2022, I think, on Boschbot, and just the experience of experiencing like one of the early wimmelbilder through this sort of piecemeal medium. So I recommend people go read that, but I'm going to steer us back now from probably my own meandering rather than yours, back towards wimmelbilder. So I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about, like, I don't know, I know that you sort of described it as you realizing that you had already been doing some of this stuff. So can you take us back to the beginning of your interest in, teaming pictures?
Sure. I think I was thinking about, I think a lot of us who draw probably a natural Wimmel builders. When we're doodling, in class, when we're teenagers, sort of you just keep adding to the drawing is basically at the nuts of it. My interest in it, I think, only developed really accidentally. I never set out and said, I'm going to draw a page of detailed things. I guess a few times I started drawing and was drawing it. I like drawing small things in the first place, sort of 1 inch across detail with like a ballpoint pen or some kind of like fine tipped ink thing. And it just sort of came from there. But then I guess a lot of the books that I was reading as a kid would have helped me develop that sort of style of drawing smaller characters. And then when I was developing Wayward Strand as well, there was this one particular kids book that I referenced so much, and it's a book called A Puzzling Day at Castle Macpelican by I assume a Scottish author and illustrator called Scoular Anderson.
I would go with Schuyler, but be wrong. Probably Schuyler Anderson, maybe. Yeah,
perfect. But beautiful.
A lovely tartan covered person in the sort of the center of the cover. If like I'm sort of looking at the cover now on Google Images, and there's a nice ginger bearded person in tartan with two kids either side, which sort of invites you in to presumably Castle McPelton.
Yeah, that's it. And it's just basically it's sort of 12 double spread. It's a big book, like physically it's an A3 book, so it's double spreaded with these illustrations, and it's published by Walker Books. They published a series of books called Game Books. I think in the late 80s, and then certainly throughout my childhood in the 90s. And so you spend a lot of time with this book because on every page you had to find all 22 dogs, and you had to help Aunt Forgetalia find the thing that she'd lost. And you had to track down this particular item on every page. And again, we're looking at like illustrations that are tiny, tiny, tiny. And it's like Where's Wally, really, isn't it? But with maybe a bit more to do. And there's something really like fresh about the style. It's like wibbly wobbly. It's colored in watercolor, so that inspired me to get my hands into watercolor when I started doing that. And then I think in terms of like worky work, the Goose Game map is a pretty solid example of when I was like, oh, okay, I'll do this as a commission, and that was fantastic. That was just a really nice focused. It was the first time I think I did one where I had a big plan for how the illustration would finish out, rather than sort of just a doodle gone wild.
For people trying to imagine this sort of loose-ish, watercolorish style of a puzzling day at Castle MacPelican, I would say it's not so far off Quentin Blake, who is probably one of the more famous kind of illustrators of children's books in the world, who famously did all the Roald Dahl and much else besides.
Imagine Quentin Blake drawing tiny.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good kind of summary for sure. And I think that you've already sort of touched on a really clear thing, which is how playful this stuff is. Like, just
super
like
playful.
At basic level, just like calling them a game book isn't even necessary to acknowledge that they are an extremely playful form. They play with the reader's powers of observation by first overwhelming you and then like allowing you to find your own way in. So there's like this extra level of like agency involved in engaging with this kind of illustration, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of ties in with the very basic principle of like movement. When you're looking at a painting or a piece of art, your eye, the artist can kind of employ some tactics to almost force the viewer's eye to move in a particular direction around the piece. And I think Wimmelbild kind of, exactly. It shocks them into going, oh my God, I've got infinite choices. And then there's a lot of pleasure to be had from letting yourself choose, where to put your eye. And of course, like hours and hours of content to find in there. In terms of like gameplay as well, you've seen Adrian de Jong or Jong?
De Jong, Adrian de Jong's Hidden Folks is probably the most famous example of like hidden object games, which I suppose is just a really natural progression from this, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Just in terms of like turning it into literal interactivity, that's got to be it. But very, very playful. Richard Scarry is another, or like I was thinking about this subject before I came on. There's a couple of artists who I think kind of fit into maybe like the side pod of Wimmelbild. Richard Scarry has that same like sort of playful and loose, energetic style that gives you so much to look at. You can look at a picture that he did of a pig and spend time really focusing on the hoofs because they're just so well drawn, or they're so energetic in a way that's interesting.
And American listeners in particular will be probably familiar with Richard Scarry's work immediately on Googling, like it the best word book ever is one of his books. Busy town. What do people do all day? And like aimed at kids, but like you say, with this like yeah, I mean you're saying it better than me because you're the expert in this, obviously. But just to reiterate, this like incredible energy to every line, and you know, in places refusing perspective because the energy comes from drawing a line in a different way on the line of a house or a line of a car, that kind of thing.
Speaking of like refusing perspective, I was like, man, let's find out the history of this thing. And I obviously landed pretty quickly on Bosch and Bruegel and those guys. And then I was like, what about like hieroglyphics, like the start of physical markings, you know, when people first started to draw? Did they do any of this sort of stuff? And it's sort of like, it bursts the question open, like what makes a wimmelbild? Does it have to be a huge drawing that's ridiculously compact, or can it be kind of any scene that's got multiple, you know, subjects in it?
Is the biotapestry
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things as well I read about was like that one of the core parts of wimmelbilder is that it tends to have the subject of both landscape or setting and the living subjects totally in focus. Like everything is in focus. And yeah, I think that's what got me onto hieroglyphics and all of that sort of stuff. So I don't think wimmelbilder is ever going to erupt and become like a genre of art, to be honest. I think it's something that comes really naturally to anybody who likes to draw. As I said at the start, like I don't think you can be taught it. I don't think you need to be taught it. I think a lot of artists just follow their noodle and it falls out. And so maybe it's just something that artists are always going to do. I don't know.
And so
I'm just rambling a bit.
No. This is the place for us to enjoy listening to you ramble about a thing you care about. That's the point of the podcast. Do not worry.
Very good.
I think I was drifting away in some of my thoughts around, like, so long ago, maybe even 15 years ago now, I did a PhD on interactive practices as anti-capitalist practice. And part of that, I tried to draw a sort of short history of interaction in the arts. And there is this sort of long history of propaganda panorama. And one of the reasons that they built these panoramas, and they were just built out of like really, like, they were huge paintings or tapestries, which were hung in a circle around you. And you would like go into this construction made of wood and climb up the stairs and stand in the middle and be surrounded by usually a battle. And they like toured. And it was a way of saying, hey, your king doing so good at killing all those bad people on our borders who are causing you some hassle and stuff, right? And yeah, it was definitely like, you know, propaganda in an older sense. But again, like that interest in sort of like immersing the person in the art, and the overwhelm of it as being an invitation to interact with it, like to move closer, to choose your journey through it. Like interaction comes in lots of levels of agency, and this is definitely the lowest level, which is like you choose where to look, you choose the order in which to tell this story. But it's just, I think that is like, I was really excited to discover this thing that you've offered to us, wimmelbilder, as a really just natural progression between static art or perhaps plastic art or, you know, physical art, and the human instinct to play, which crosses over with theatre and then panorama, and back today to like hidden object games. And oh my gosh, have you seen I Commissioned Some Bees?
No, it sounds awesome though.
It's a hidden bee game. And it's called I Commissioned Some Bees. And essentially this person has commissioned 10 artists to hide 1,300 bees in 10 individual sort of works. And yeah,
that's so great.
And each level is obviously a different artist, so it feels really different, and there's like an extra layer there, I think, to like the hidden objectness, where you're not used to the artist's style when you move on to a next one, so you have to learn a new visual language of how things are hidden, which I just think is really fun.
That is the perfect idea for a video game.
Right.
I'm definitely gonna get that. Yeah, that would be such a ride, I think, to switch visual styles between those. You do really adjust, you do get really used to it. And I think if you're able to get into that like really meditative space of looking around a picture, you'd very quickly like find your favorite. I'm also amazed the tricky thing I've found, because I'm working on this one particular illustration that I've been working on for, like, obviously in spurts since 2021. And I'm thinking like, oh, I should keep track of how many dogs are in this drawing, or how many pieces of fruit are in this drawing, or whatever. And it's hard because you sometimes you forget. It's like sometimes when you're reading a book and you've read 3 pages and you suddenly realize you haven't been paying attention. It's like that. You go, oh my God, I've been drawing dogs, and I have to go back and count them, but now I have to go back and find all of them. So imagining having to track the amount of bees. How many bees was it, Hannah?
1,300 according to the Steam page. So
no,
I don't know if anyone has checked yet. Presumably brutal. Someone has, because you invite it if you state the kind of person who's going to play a game where you declare that there are 1,300 bees. Probably the kind of person who I guess they must have been given the commission of 130 bees because there are 10 artists. In any case.
Oh, yeah. Either way, it's a lot of bees. I love that though.
Plenty of bees.
I'm definitely gonna.
Bees are good ones, right? We like bees. Bees are fairly helpful creatures.
Good subject.
So I'm going to move us on a bit more to your work now. I want to talk in more detail about Wayward Strand in a second, but I thought that let's start with the Goose Game map, because it sounds like that sort of... So the Goose Game came after you'd done a majority of the work on Wayward Strand. So that's maybe your the one which is most up to date with your being aware that wimmelbilder are a thing. And I just wonder how, like, number one, you describe that as a wimmelbilder, and number two, how do you go about making one?
All right. It was... Oh my gosh, it was such a nice time making that map. So I think there was a fair bit of consultation with the House boys to start, what they wanted and what they wanted to have in it. And I think they said to me that they liked the level of detail that they'd seen in my drawings, and they wanted me to do the job. So they said that we definitely want one goose, and then I'd played the game, obviously. No, God. No, you're just giving me nightmares from the time.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to really quickly intervene to say, for those who are listening who might not know, Goose Game, we're talking about Untitled Goose Game, which is a game made by, do they call themselves a collective or a studio?
I think they're a studio. I'm not sure.
House, who are a game studio based out of Melbourne, including many of the RMIT kits. And they've made...
Sure about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, maybe it's just Michael who did his PhD there.
He did. Oh, yeah, he did.
At least one RMIT kid.
Yeah, that's right.
And Goose Game is a game where you play in a sleepy English village and you are a troublesome goose. And if you Google it, it got very, very viral because it's an excellent conceit. And very funny how English a thing these Aussie boys have made. I'm going to hand back to you now to talk about how you made the piece of merch, which is a beautiful map of the game.
It's also just it's like it's built like a wimmelbilder in that you are this little goose, and as you kind of perform some really goosey puzzles, more of this village unlocks, and the little scenes. So you start off getting into... You wake up in the sort of woods, and then you end up going into like this really beautifully detailed farmer's garden, and then a market area, and then some very English backyards, and then there's a whole pub level, and then there's another level that I won't describe in case of spoilers, and it's all packed with dense detail, and the map that they wanted to commission was to be sold or to be included in the physical release of the game, which I just want to shout out to. I was with one of the House boys when somebody from PlayStation like met him and shook his hand and said, "Oh, what do you think about physical release?" And the first thing out of this person's mouth was, "Yeah, maybe, but only if we can have sustainable packaging." I was just so thrilled. I was like, that's a really good thing. And they were, they were able to do that. And so shout out quickly to the sustainable packaging there.
And a really good use of the power that game going super viral gave them, because
Yeah, big time.
most of us, when asked that by PlayStation, could say only if it's wholly sustainable and recyclable. And I'd like to think PlayStation are great partners and would listen to everyone, but being as successful as Goose Game gave them the clout to be able to really like ask that. And it was great that someone set that precedent for everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's just a little bit of trivia on that part of their history. Anyway, whatever, they were like, we're going to do this release. We would like you to make the map. I said, fantastic, I'd love to do that for you. So the process was pretty much working with them to talk about ideas and scale. We then started sketching kind of sort of ideas for layout. There's this map that was produced in Melbourne in, I want to say, the 80s. It's called the Melbourne Map. And it's a wimmelbilder map of Melbourne, and then it was recommissioned in probably 2016 or 17, I'd guess, and redrawn at a huge scale. Some artist standing there with tiny details, and it's really a bird's eye view at a slight angle over all of Melbourne, and it's just this gorgeous piece of art. So that was like one of the touchstones, and other examples of maps like that they were kind of wanting to get into, but at a much over just one small town versus a giant city. So it's there's more opportunity to see the detail in there. Anyway, I got I think it was an A0 piece of paper, a couple of A0 pieces of paper. Some new pencils and pens. Digitally, I think we did it first. So we sketched it out and did all of the tweaks that needed to happen, really aligned everything to make sure that, like in hieroglyphics, and everything that needed to be seen sort of could be seen. The perspective warping was a real nightmare, but we figured out where the picture should be pivoted from, which was sort of the market square. So a lot of, sort of mind bending around how to do the layout. Then I just drew a grid in Photoshop over the top of the illustration, and ruled up. I think that each square on this piece of paper was like 1.2 inches. And it was maybe 50 inches across. And then, over the next sort of month, penciled it in, and then inked it with really nice fine liners. And I think that the drawing, like the pencil drawing, probably took the longest because there were so many little beautiful details to include. And then the inking is sort of pretty straightforward. You just don't want to make a mistake when you're inking. That's the only thing. Then you erase all of the pencil line. And at this stage, we're kind of including all of the time spent like planning the drawing and talking about the drawing before starting. I think at this stage, we're sort of 15 or 16 days of long days in. Once it had been inked, I took it to the local like office supply chain and scanned it. And then we did a couple of color tests to see whether we wanted to color it digitally or color it with watercolors, which would be more time consuming, but ultimately looked way better and looked kind of, wobblier and lovelier. Then I took it to like a proper art scanner, and they scanned it in at like 1 billion DPI, and I took it into Photoshop and just tweaked some of the colors. So the river in the original is quite a electric, bright, light blue, and I really wanted to dull that down and balance it out and kind of match the colors of the game a bit more. So
also, we do dump a lot of sewage in our water these days. So
if
it was
that's right.
Meaning to be English, it needed to be like a dirty pooey brown. I should say that you have made a really beautiful Twitter thread about the
Yeah, people
process.
like that.
Like 50 or so tweets which show from those early kind of experiments. You've done sort of mock-ups digitally before going to that huge piece of paper. You used up a whole black win pencil almost in the drawing of the pencil lines and stuff. So I will make sure that that's linked in the liner notes so people can take a look through that really beautiful process thread, which hopefully is still accessible to people. But you do these days have to log into Twitter to see Twitter threads, I think. Sorry for linking to Twitter. When
right.
This was posted in 2020, it was less of a broken thing.
I'll repost it on Blue Sky.
Yeah,
if it survives, then you can see it there.
What do you feel like do you feel like you learned or developed in a particular way from that like incredible intensive piece of work?
For sure. I mean, when you're working on a piece that I was in, I think I hit flow state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is when you. So I was reading about flow state, and this psychologist in the 70s said, the ego falls away. It's just you and the piece, blah, 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 and there's three things. His name's Csikszentmihalyi. I think he was Czechoslovakian at the time. And he said there are three things you need to do to enter flow state. First thing is activity. The activity must have a clear set of goals and progress, which gives you direction and structure. So I had that. The task at hand must have clear and immediate feedback, which will help you with adjustments and to help you know how well you're doing. And I had that. Obviously, I could tell whether I liked it or not. And then, of course, the guys also gave me their feedback along the way. And then the third is that there must be a good balance between the perceived challenge of the task and then also the individual's own skills. And because it was this kind of new scale of illustration, and it was a very delicate piece for me. I really didn't want to screw it up. Especially once you get past the pencil stage, it's like I'm now moving on to permanent marks. So it was challenging, but I don't know I think what I got out of it is that it was successful, and it really helped to validate some of my own feelings at the time, and it was really inspirational to me, and I think it's informed a lot of my own personal drawings since then, and also just has reminded me that I love to spend 7-8 hours sitting at the same desk over the same piece of art. I got diagnosed with ADHD not long after completing the map, which might have something to do with how I was able to key in so hard. But I really enjoy that feeling. It's like meditation, totally. And then I guess that's my answer is it was more of a mental health thing, it's sort of a not to get too strange, but like it was almost spiritual to spend that much time focused on one task. It was really nice. I would like to do another one. It's just, it's I think a lot of artists probably do the same thing when they say like, oh, I'd really love to like make my graphic novel, or I'd really love to make my game, as a solo person. But you then look ahead and you go, well, that's going to be, 27 days of 8 to 9 hours, and it can be hard to like jump on and do another one. But I've got an iPad in the meantime, and I've been doing some digital ones, which doesn't give you quite the same satisfaction, but yeah.
And thank you for bringing Czech mental high. You know what? I wrote about this guy a ton in PhD as well, and I never got my tongue around his name. But yes, the psychologist, his theory of flow is fairly misused in games, I think, a ton to like because originally it was a neutral psychological description of a certain state, and it can sometimes be good, and it experienced in sports, it's experienced in the practice of arts, and And it really comes back to this idea of intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. Like the reason you're not doing it for outside reasons is the reasons why play is so good at it and sport is so good at it, right? Like the places where you step out of, I'm doing this for, I mean, sometimes sport is done for money, but like, you know, you're doing it for like the joy of that moment or the challenge of that moment. And it seems to me that there's something really wonderful there in discovering a strength in yourself and your practice, which is that all you need is a, you know, a pencil or maybe some inks and a big piece of paper, and like you get joy out of that. That's a wonderful finding as a practitioner.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, you find it in other places. I used to do a lot of hiking when I was younger, and it was a challenge because I'm a big girl. And but when you spend a day with your thoughts just hiking through beautiful countryside or over hills and down dales, I think you get out of it the same level of clarity afterwards. You think, well, that was a beautiful experience. I had a nice time. I achieved something that was challenging, and you kind of come out the other side having learned things about the world and yourself. And yeah, I don't know. I am lucky to be able to get that out of drawing.
Yeah,
I'm sure you get the same thing out of cycling.
Harder and harder
sometimes.
to find. Like I would say that sometimes I get it out of cycling, but actually I do also listen to podcasts while I cycle. I think I did an Ironman once in the year I turned 30. I wanted to do like the longest distance of triathlon that you can do, just so that I had some kind of milestone that I could own that wasn't like society's milestones that I clearly was failing to meet. So I was like, I'm gonna make my own achievement and achieve it. So I did an Ironman, and one of the things that I was that I had to deal with was that you're not allowed to have headphones for very reasonable safety reasons,
I
etc.
guess, yeah.
So and it did not take me a short amount of time. I think it took me 14 hours in the end. So that was like 14 solid hours of trying to do a thing that involves an amount of like pushing yourself mentally without anything to distract you. And I remember talking to a lot of sports psychologists, because the other thing is that I was a theatre maker at the time. So of course I made a piece of theatre called Equations for a Moving Body about the science and psychology of endurance sport, because then I could write off all of my costs against tax. So I did make a touring one-person storytelling theatre show, which went to Edinburgh the year following, about doing the Ironman. And one thing sports psychologists talked about was how sports people often do differ between an intrinsic and an extrinsic motivational style, but the most successful sports people are people who can be intrinsically motivated, not being driven by the medal or the money, but being driven by pushing themselves in that moment, not having to distract themselves from the pain, but identifying with it, but understanding it's not pain that does them harm. It's pain about exertion and their body trying to tell them things and stuff, and sort of identifying with it and the activity, rather than like I do, which is sometimes, listening to podcasts, especially when I run, because I'm bad at running. I'm not a small girl myself. I'm not sure if I qualify as a big girl, but I'm definitely not small. I've always been someone who's, I was a swimmer growing up, so I've got a swimmer's physique, if that means anything to anyone.
It does.
So yeah, I think it's harder for us to find these days, though, this state of like
oh yeah, I think about that a lot, Hannah. Like I don't know, I think I'm at the age now where I'm starting to look at the younger generation and feel worried about it.
Hurrah, we've made it. We are now officially our equivalent of boomers.
Yeah. So I don't know what the answer is, because we've never lived in a time when we have been so inactive, and we've never lived in a time where we've been so glued to screens. Like my government has just started playing ads about eye health in children. And I don't know anything about all of that, but that's, we'll find out. And the thing about history is that, like, it marches forward, and there's always going to be something scary and new happening. But I do think that I feel, just as an individual who hasn't researched this, but I feel as an individual that perhaps the sort of concentration and that ability to sit with your thoughts and in nature has certainly diminished. Like I certainly am not doing it as much as I was when I was younger, but maybe that's just an adult thing. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe, but I do think there's something there. I mean, I always thought that if I had money, which I absolutely don't, I always thought that a really interesting investment would be in like hearing aids and hearing aid research, because elder millennials, maybe the end of Gen X, the first generation to have personal audio, like headphones and
Yeah.
gigs, and the level of amplification that happens regularly at like the kind of spread of DIY and underground gigs that didn't exist quite as much. And I'm not going to deny that punk was loud. I just think that our generation are going to have a really big hearing loss issue. And
Yeah, for sure.
if you got that money, I don't know, invest in hearing loss research and then send me a little bit as a thank you. I don't know.
Smart idea.
But in general, definitely our culture changes and changes and changes as time goes on. And I don't know about you, but I find myself craving, but also being afraid of deep focus time in ways. Like my job certainly doesn't lend itself to deep focus anymore. It used to when I was just quote unquote a writer, but now I run a company. I'm in a billion places at once, and I find my brain, like, you know, when you crave some really healthy food, I find my brain craving reading a really difficult book, but I never get around to it. I don't know.
Well, it's the long and short answer is capitalism, mate. Like, you know, that it's we don't have time. We don't have time. We have so much to worry about. We don't wake up and feed the chickens and check the water levels and then spend the morning reading anymore. We pay a stranger $1,500 to live in their house. Like it's I don't know. I'm not scared of concentration. I think it's a pretty hard thing to make time for, because you do have to give up, especially if you're an ambitious person who wants to survive as a creative, which sucks to say. Like, God, it sucks to say that, but that's how it kind of always has been, hasn't it? You know, if you're creative and you want to be an artist,
always being paid for less time than a thing actually takes, again, because capitalism. Oh yeah, like I think, like, just trying to tease out a takeaway for maybe listeners who might be at the beginning of their practices. One thing it took me a little while to learn as an individual practitioner before this job that I do now. I was just an artist or a writer, right? And I was doing commission after commission after commission, because I was in an area where commissions lasted a week to 4 weeks rather than a year, where it might in a game. And in that context, I had to really quickly understand how I work and not hold it against myself. Like, I feel like a lot of people can struggle and sometimes not continue pursuing creative pursuits because they feel like they're bad and wrong because they can't just generate content all the time. And actually, the truth is that when I quote 4 days for a job, I know that I need to be sitting around for 3 days just not doing the job. And then I'll do it all on the 4th day. But that 4th day would not have happened without those 3 days of just fucking around. And probably stuff was happening in my head. Stuff was percolating. I was working stuff out, but I needed that time. And also the kind of slightly angry energy to do the thing on the last day. But then a key part of my practice and understanding myself was then going, and then I'm just going to release that anger into the world because I made a good thing and I'm happy with it. And it sounds like similar that you sort of, especially with your recent diagnosis of ADHD, like part of that map was getting to know yourself as a practitioner and knowing that one of the, ADHD is neurodivergence. It's not like a problem, right? And it just means that you have, it's a problem in a society which isn't accessible to neurodivergent people, but you have relative hyper focus is one of the things which it can bring, and that can be healthy as well as unhealthy, right? And navigating that as a practitioner is part of your job, I suppose.
Exactly. I think I keep thinking about how long, people always say life's short, and it is short until you get hit, if you get hit by a bus, but otherwise it's pretty long. And I don't know, I just think I just wish there was time to do all of these creative projects and not have to worry about surviving. And I do want to encourage young people who are listening who are going to chase creativity, because not so many times, a few times I've really seriously sat down and gone, Goldie, are you being ridiculous? Should you stop? Should you go and move corporate or get a job that's going to not be as creative, and should I stop trying to pursue this art thing? And then I say, well, I can't. I can't. This is what I really love to do, and chasing that. I think chasing that that moment where these ideas are just popping off, and you're really being creative. You can't really stop it. I don't know. Oh, maybe I'll find out. I'm pretty young, so. But
yeah, and
yeah.
I mean, but then like there's a whole new set, like not to also denigrate the power of doing following creative pursuits in your spare time. Like one of the evils capitalism did would say that was to create like creativity as a job and not something everyone does and has like a natural disposition for. The second that you make it your job, you're then also bowing to extrinsic pressures as well as intrinsic pleasures within the application of your creativity. So like I don't know, the DIY, the craft, the people enjoying
that's all
things.
great stuff.
Yeah, like it doesn't mean that you're less of a practitioner, right?
No, you're right. It's so important to remember all of the stuff outside of yourself when you're talking about this stuff, because truly collaboration and being in that idea moment with other people who are on the same page, that's another form of just like ultimate creative rush. And when you're collaborating in particular, or when you get the same rush out of business maybe, or marketing, you'll be fine. It'll all be fine.
So I'm going to move us towards the end of the recording now to sort of the biggest sort of work of game that you've been involved with recently is Wayward Strand.
Yeah.
And I wondered if there were just any sort of, neat ribbons or tunnels you want to dive down into with regards to neat ribbons tied. I didn't finish that part, and now I've split them. So that's a great piece of hosting, Hannah. I wonder if you wanted to explore any Wayward Strand with regards to this topic of wimmelbilder.
Yeah, sure. Gosh, Wayward Strand, what a blast. That was a time. I had the best time working with those people, and we're still really good friends, and we're working on, what's coming next, and that's been really, really exciting and good. So Wayward Strand came out nearly a year ago. I think 5 weeks from now will be a year ago. And in typical indie game dev fashion, we all ended up wearing a lot of hats. So I was the art director on that project, which is a role that I shared with Aspen Foster, who came on. She's a wizard, and another local game dev here, and she was sort of much more technically minded than me. But over the course of like making and then trying to release Wayward Strand, which we did on like Switch and PlayStation 4 and even PlayStation 5, which at the time was new, and like Xbox and Steam and everything, I ended up wearing kind of a marketing hat, and I definitely was doing a lot of the sort of business relations and networking and all of the sort of stuff you have to do to get yourself onto those platforms and funded, and so it was a draining project in that there was just so much to do. But when I reflect on it and I look back on it, and I feel really proud of the team and of the game, I always just think of the pleasure that I had developing the art for Wayward Strand. The goal at the inception of the game visually for me was obviously the same goal that I think a lot of illustrators who come into game dev have, which is I want it to look like it's not digital. So for a long time I was sort of painting a lot of the textures in watercolor, and it just ended up taking too much time. So it is digitally produced, but yeah, it's sort of supposed to look like a picture book, and it's also supposed to be enjoyed by a really wide range of ages. Like it's super accessible for people who might be completely new to games, whether that's a 6-year-old or a 86-year-old. And so I was particularly thinking about the little brothers and sisters watching their older sibling play Wayward Strand, and I wanted to make sure that every time there was a still, so Wayward Strand's like a side-on, it's like a dollhouse the camera is just on a side-on perspective. It's a 3D game,
and there's a lot of 3D performing 2D as well. So if you took one screenshot of a character, it looks 2D, but as they turn, you see that it's a 3D character modeled to look 2D.
Yeah, exactly. We had to do that with all of the props as well. I was like, oh, we'll just billboard all of the props and make them flat. But then, of course, because the camera kind of dollies side to side and up and down, it just gave a better effect to have all of the props be 3D. And I think that was compacted as well by having some of the props needed to be interacted with. And if only some of them were 3D, then the 2D ones would look even worse and so on. So yeah, it's a 3D/2D kind of game, but it was important to me that every frame, no matter where you stopped, if you were stopping to have a conversation with somebody in the game, your little brother or little sister could pour over the screenshot. There'd be a lot of detail for them to follow around with their eyes, like what I enjoy about wimmelbilder. So that was
because you're getting to know these characters and stuff, right? So part of it is getting to know the people and the stories behind them. And if you look at one person's bedroom and there are books on a shelf and photos all around, but they're all black and white photos with a young, beautiful woman in them. And now you're talking to an older woman with grey hair with mobility issues. Like, it's
such
just
a pleasure.
The story, right?
Yeah, for sure. I really love that sort of stuff that, I don't know, I guess writers have exactly the same amount of access to, and probably musicians have a similar amount of access to that sort of storytelling where you can hint towards a whole nother part of this character, a whole nother previous life that they've led just by a simple photograph that's on their shelf. So there's a lot of that. Yeah, the characterization. So yeah, Wayward Strand is... I read your piece in The Guardian the other day, Hannah, and you're talking about how Salt Sea's like an ensemble piece. That's exactly what Wayward Strand was for us as well. It's really a game about the characters. You're doing it differently to how we did. We had a protagonist who you played as, and it was really her story. But the characters in Wayward Strand are really vital to it, and we developed them with so much love and care and history, and getting to design their individual bedrooms was such a cool opportunity. It was like, oh, this is really the perfect game for me to be working on. I get to fluff it out with detail that tells story. So yeah, I really loved working on it.
I will make sure that your both Wayward Strand and the Goose Map process thread are both in the liner notes, and I'll also throw in there, if you said at the end, like, just pick up a pen and try drawing if you enjoyed it when you were a kid. I'll also throw in Linda Barry's What It Is, which is a wonderful book by a kind of comics artist, which is about, I don't know, just being creative. And it's this super, super full visual. It's, it's full of, it's not a Wimmelbilder in the sort of detail, but it's like a collage book. It's like a very full-on book, but it's very much about like just having the confidence to draw no matter how, like, quote unquote good you think you are. And the same with writing as well. So I'll link that in the thing. So if anyone's listening is like, but where do I start drawing? If I just draw something now, it feels silly. Buy Linda Barry's What It Is, because it's one of the best tools I've ever found for students who just need something to get them going, whether it be writing or drawing. So
that's so good. That sounds great. And put in I commissioned some bees.
Oh yes, I commissioned some bees, which I'm going to send to you as well, because it sounds like a game that you'll be into.
Oh, I can't wait.
Goldie, thank you so much for your time. Where should we follow you? Is there anything you'd like to promote?
No. I'm pretty much trying to wean myself off Twitter at the moment. If you really want to, I'm there at Ghost Town Goldie. I've started Blue Sky there. I'm City Loop. You can also just reach out to me on email, which you'll be able to, data mine from somewhere, I'm sure. At the moment, as I said, between projects, so I'm sure I'll be trying to connect with people once Ghost Pattern gets the next thing going. But for now, just reach out if you are chill and would like to chat.
Please commission Goldie.
Yeah, sure. That would be handy.
I'm going to be confident for you and just say it. Everyone should commission Goldie to make beautiful drawings and things, and have been an art director on a game. So you've got a real wild wide amount of experience on different areas.
Thanks, Han. I hope it was helpful, and yeah, I would, if you're listening, you can commission me. Yes.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, Goldie. Have a great day. And thanks for spending some time with us.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of One Cool Thing from Digue de Fabrique. As usual, leave that rating and review where you can. And also, please do wishlist Salt Sea Chronicles on Steam, ideally. Salt Sea Chronicles is a flooded world, brand new story-driven adventure game where you investigate a mystery as a ship's whole crew. It's the next game from the makers of Mutazione. That's us. We made it, Digue de Fabrique. And this next game, it represents a real sort of step up in our storytelling ambition. I'm so proud of it and all the people that have worked on it. And we will hopefully be announcing our release date real soon. If we've already announced it by the time that I say this goes out, then I'm sure that I will have recorded some kind of extra sort of intro or outro, and this one will be chucked into the trash can. Whether or not it has, I want you to go to Steam and wishlist Salt Sea Chronicles right now, or head to saltseachronicles.com to find out more. It really helps us. Please do so. I'll be back soon with a new episode speaking with another cool thinker and maker in the field of video games. And in the meantime, as well as doing all those things, look, come on, we're giving you a podcast for free. These are just like some little Googling you can do while you're supposed to be listening to a meeting on Zoom, all right? So do go and find Digue de Fabrique on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok as Gute Fabrique, Gutefabrik. This podcast was produced, edited, and sound designed by Tom Wally. Additional production and research by Unamin Kavanagh. Our theme music is by Nick Ellis, whose music you can find under the name of 10B on Bandcamp, TENBY. And all that's left is for me to ask you to stay thoughtful, take care, and say goodbye.